Hello friends, my name is Marines. About a month ago, the conversation about diversity within the bookish community got a little bit louder. At first, this boost, if you will, in conversation came from a negative place. A person who put out a video that was denouncing diversity, and it came from a very misinformed, miseducated, and racist place. And I also think that it doesn't for 1 second do any amount of good to repeat anything that was within that video. For anyone who has been around my channel, you know that diversity and representation are topics that I really enjoy talking about and exploring personally, but also as an extension of my fascination with the way that media matters. You probably also know that I love to make collaborative videos. I think it is so powerful when we can pull pieces of different conversations and stories and narratives and put it together in one place. And so with all of that in mind, my contribution to everything that has been going on was to reach out to different people and ask them if they were willing to be part of this video collaboration that I wanted to put together about why diversity matters and why diversity is important. The response was overwhelming in the best possible way. I originally intentioned this to be one video with lots of different people just kind of briefly talking about why diversity matters to them, and I just received so much footage that that would be impossible. So what I am actually able to make now is a series of videos, and I'm going to call them episodes about different topics within this broad scope of diversity. Over the next couple of weeks, with some help from my bookish friends, we'll be talking about not only why diversity matters, but about seeing yourself represented in media, about empathy, about accuracy, and we'll be trying to answer some of the most common things that are said against diversity. I figured today that a very good place to start would be with some stories, some personal stories, just about seeing yourself reflected in media for the very first time.
Hey, my name is Lily Meade. I'm an aspiring young adult author, and I make videos on writing, books, and happiness on my channel, Lily Meade Books. I'm biracial, white and black. I'm disabled, and my family lives well below the poverty line. I didn't always consider diversity important. That was mainly because my mother's prime goal with my childhood was making sure that I valued myself and understood my worth. So it didn't really matter to me that most of the people in the books I read and the movies I saw and the TV shows I watched didn't look like me, because I knew that I was just as capable of doing what they did. Also, as a biracial child, white heroes reminded me of my mother. I felt and feel a strong connection to both sides of my heritage. That was a big problem for me as a child, realizing that people didn't see me as more than one thing. A lot of society is divided into labels, and if you don't fit perfectly, you don't fit in at all. So for a long time, I didn't try to change that. I spent a lot of my formative years in a lake town. I learned how to be a teenage girl in white suburbia. I unapologetically love Taylor Swift. But I also get so happy every time I see fan art of Hermione as a black girl, because she literally looks just like me. Something inside me just breaks open seeing one of the most important characters of Harry Potter, internationally beloved, a role model to girls everywhere, as a mirror of myself. It's a feeling like something deep in my heart that just warms me to the core. When I saw the fan art for the first time, I showed it to my family and they thought I drew it myself. The resemblance was so uncanny. I really can't describe how I felt in that moment.
Hi, my name is Ashley. I'm from the channel Tea Leaves and Bookbindings. I am a cisgendered, able-bodied queer woman with light brown skin and some issues with anxiety. I can honestly say that growing up, diversity wasn't a huge thing in my life. It wasn't something I thought about. That's because it wasn't until now in the last few years, in my 20s, that I actually saw myself reflected in the media I consumed. In the last few years, I finally started to see myself in the books that I've been reading, and the first book that I ever saw myself in was Breadcrumbs by Anne Ursu. And when I read this book, I was amazed to first of all see myself, but even then it wasn't like a big thing for me. I read the book, I really liked it, but then I kept thinking about the book, like I couldn't get the book out of my head. I continued to think about it. And I'd think about it and I'd start to cry. I'd be sitting in my truck driving somewhere and I think about Breadcrumbs and I get so emotional because it was the first thing I really saw myself in. And I think it can be really hard for anybody who does constantly see themselves in media or even people who never see themselves in media to understand how it feels to see yourself, because once you see yourself for the first time and you understand what it feels like to be in the media you consume, it's just the best feeling. But before that, you're just like, what does matter? This is the usual. Because as marginalized people who live with marginalizations, we just grow up and we're expected to empathize with the majority and to understand how they feel, and it doesn't really matter how we feel.
Hey guys, I'm Meth from Bookworm Wonders, and I am a straight, cisgendered, able-bodied Mexican woman with considerably light skin. A few weeks ago, I read for the very first time a book with a Latina main character who wasn't stereotyped for the very first time in my entire life. And guys, I'm 20 years old. I've been reading books since I was around 2 years old. I learned to read before I learned to do a lot of other things. And just 2 weeks ago, I finally read a book, a fantasy book by the way, where the main character was someone I could see myself in, and she was someone that got a happy ending, and she was amazing, and she got a great character development, and she kicked ass.
Hi everyone, I'm Paige from the Minimalist BOOKTUBER. I identify as a straight, cisgendered, biracial woman. My mom is black and my dad is white. I was born in Canada, but I grew up in Barbados because my mom didn't want to live somewhere where she was the only person of color in a town where my dad grew up. Being biracial, I have always felt like an outsider to two separate communities. I always felt when I was younger that I had to choose which part of myself I connected with more / wanted to identify as. I never knew that I could just accept both parts of myself to create just me as I am, because I never saw myself in the media. I never saw biracial people, and I was always told that I was white in Barbados because of my lack of melanin. Because I am so pale, people always referred to me as white, so that is what I identified with when I was younger, just because people told me that's what I was. So in Canada was actually the first time that I realized I was a person of color, because that's what people saw me as. They noticed the hair was different. They noticed I was always tan year round. So they were like, yo, you're not exactly white, are you? What are you? That is the most common question is, what are you? Like I am some kind of commodity instead of a person. They tried to make it a guessing game. I grew up going to a library that was a converted plantation house, and at this library all the children's books only featured white casts and white protagonists. I don't remember ever reading a book that had a black character in it, which was ironic considering Barbados's population, majority of it's black, and I just grew up surrounded by people that I never saw in the media. The first book that I actually saw myself in, that I remember just feeling a sense of, oh my god, like representation, was, this is gonna sound weird, but The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, because Katniss is described as having olive skin. And that is the most racially ambiguous description. Now I realized older, having seen it so many more times in books, and then Hollywood always casting them as a white female who happens to have a tan. I realize now it doesn't mean POC more often than not. At 16, seeing that for the first time in a description, I took that racially ambiguous description and I ran like hell with it. I connected with that character and that story so much more, I think, because I saw myself in it, and I realized for the first time that this is so hard. I didn't expect to get emotional. I realized for the first time that I could be in books. I didn't expect to get emotional talking about this because I made a script, but I think I was just like parched for representation. I just didn't realize until that moment when I read that she had olive skin that I needed it.
Hi, my name is Jade, and I have a booktube channel and a book blog called Bedtime Bookworm. I'm a straight, half Korean, half Caucasian woman who occasionally struggles with depression and anxiety. Diversity and representation in the media is important to me for multiple reasons. One reason is that it's validating. Seeing and reading characters that look like me and are described as beautiful makes me more confident and makes me feel beautiful. Seeing and reading characters that think like me and feel like me validates my own thoughts and feelings. I grew up in a multicultural home. My father is Caucasian and was born and raised in the United States. My mother is from Korea, and she emigrated here to the United States when she was in her early 20s. When I was in my teens, I struggled with my cultural identity because I had a hard time integrating both sides of my culture. The first time I read a book that touched on this struggle was The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. This book made me cry so much, but it also taught me so many things. It taught me that this push and pull I felt between my cultures within myself was completely normal. It also taught me that I didn't have to pick between my two cultures. I am American and I am Korean, and since then I've learned to embrace both sides. That book also taught me a lot about my mother. It taught me to be more understanding of our differences, because my mother is a product of her culture and her experiences, just like I am.
The first time that I saw myself in a book was when I read an excerpt of The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. It wasn't even the full story, it was just an excerpt that was in a larger textbook of my Spanish for Spanish speakers class, and we read it, and I don't even remember what we read, to be honest, but I just remember that it inspired me so much to see this story written down that I started writing. And it wasn't ever anything where I was like, I'm going to be a published author, but it was something where I was taking the stories of my family that I had heard for all of my life, these things that are, if I told them to you, that sound sensationalized now, about, you know, how my mother grew up and how her mother met my grandfather and all of these things that are just kind of crazy, and the craziness that I saw within my own growing up experience that I saw as craziness because it was so unlike what I was surrounded with. And I started to put all of that stuff down on paper, and I started to make sense of my own history and my own culture that way, through writing it, through making fun of it sometimes, or through using humor to really process it. And all of that came about because I read this one excerpt of The House on Mango Street. It wasn't until very recently that I actually read the entire book, which is kind of short anyways, but I sat down and read the whole thing, and it was a very, very emotional experience for me because I did truly see myself reflected in the story. The main character is not the same ethnicity as I am, but she is Latina like I am, and there were just so many of her experiences that I saw myself reflected in. And she has a hard time dealing with her first name, which is Esperanza, which a lot of times when you are a marginalized person, you are marked by things that you really have no way of hiding or escaping, whether you wanted to or not, whether that's brown skin or kinky hair or a name that is so very obviously not white. So hearing Esperanza's struggles with her own name just really got to me, and it was something that I saw reflected in fiction for the first time. And it made me also realize that I always loved my name, but the struggles that I had with it growing up had really marked me, to the point where if someone mispronounced my name now, I wouldn't correct them because I felt weird about doing it, even though it's my name. I still had that kind of, touchiness about correcting somebody about how to pronounce my name, and just little things like that that you don't think are big deals, and they sound like not a big deal in the grand scheme of everyday life and all of the things that are out there, but that really come together to form a person's experiences and background, and they did so for me. So seeing that here in this book was cool. It was good.
This is Sam from Thoughts on Tomes. One of my favorite shows growing up as a teenager and young adult was, and continues to be, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And one of my favorite characters is Willow, and she has both a relationship with a man and a woman throughout the show's whole history. And that was the first time that I saw somebody that I saw as bisexual. The word wasn't said at that point. It's obviously an older show, but no one talked about that before. Everyone just talked about the fact that there was, mostly in my world, the only thing that was talked about was gay men. I didn't know anything about people who were transgender or genderqueer or bisexual or pansexual or asexual, which would have been incredibly helpful to know a lot of these things, but we're just not going to talk about it. And there's a lot of people that still aren't talked about and are, even among marginalized groups, aren't talked about. Not the point though. It was really good for me to see somebody who didn't fit the straight or only attracted to one gender narrative.
Hello, my name is Karina and I am a cisgendered, able-bodied lesbian woman. So this video is about why diversity is important, and let me tell you a little story. In 2012, I went into a bookstore at the Cologne train station because I had time and I like to peruse the shelves there, as they have more international books, meaning more books in English than my local small town bookshops do. So I was there picking up a book that was called Sing Your Home by Jodi Picoult, and I didn't know anything about the author or the book, and I just read the blurb, and it was about a woman who liked to sing, and I like to sing, so I picked it up. And boy was I surprised when there was lesbianing going on in there, and I'm telling you this because that's the book that made me realize that I am actually gay, and it just pushed me out of the closet. And that is just something I will never not be thankful for that book.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris from CHRISVIGILANTE. I am a queer, black, secular, cisgender guy. In high school, I was able to come across The Wrong Possibility and Born Just Bored by Dave Levithan. I never would have been able to seek out these books on my own. I never seeked out any more queer books. The only reason I was able to even obtain these two books was because of a school competition, or a citywide competition, the Mayor Daily Battle of the Books back then, where people would read 20 different books and then compete in them in trivia. But what I remember most about that experience, as much as I love that competition, were finding books with diverse characters that I could relate to and that mattered to me. These two books did so much for me in high school, and I've kept them since then. What they did for me was, in high school, I was going through some periods of very self-hatred and self-loathing. But I would just throw myself into schoolwork and all these different school events to try to, hide who I was, so that people wouldn't ask me about, dating or anything like that. So, because I'm just busy with school. I'm just busy with this. I don't want to date anyone right now. I could do that. I was doing a lot of hiding, even from myself. I didn't really even accept it until later on in my years, even though I had queer friends. And it made it even more difficult because I saw someone come out and it go extremely horribly. But at the same time, I then had these books, which I could read and see, Boy Meets Boy, which has such a hopeful feel to it. This book does. It made me so hopeful. It made me have some idea that hey, maybe one day I'll be able to be out and be accepted by the people around me, even if I don't think I can do that right now. This book did that for me. Wrong Possibility helped me through a little bit of depression because of that I was having in high school as well. Besides also having 3 queer characters in it, it also has a character going through depression. It has some characters going through some other issues, and it's lyrical, and it really resonated with me in high school, and it really mattered. These books allowed me to think, hey, I'm going to go to college and things are going to be different. I'm going to be able to get out of here, get great grades, and go to any college that I want. I can move further away from my parents if I need to do that, which is what I ended up doing, and try to start over and just see how it works. And I'm so glad that I've had these books to do that. And these were hard to find.
Thank you so much for watching this first episode. There are so many other contributors and so much more to say, so I hope that you will join me again on this channel for episode 2. I don't want this conversation to end, and I don't want it to stop. And I think that everyone should have the experiences that were talked about here of seeing themselves in media, and I hope that it doesn't take as long as it took for some of us to be able to see that for the next generation. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.
That growing up, diversity wasn't the biggest deal for me, but where it was in costumes and Halloween, because I love Halloween and I love dressing up.